G'day folks, welcome to the day where we put the roof on the shed. And it's all about rafter and roof basics. We're going to have to keep in mind one thing as we move forward here. We're going to use the rotate tool, and any other time we've made a part in this project, we've made it into a rectangular block and then we've made it into a component. In this case, you have to make sure that you rotate the rafter before you make it into a component, and that just has to do with it will cause us some grief down the road because of the rules of the way SketchUp works. So it's a simple thing to remember, but it's important because you kind of open up a whole can of worms if you don't do it that way. The only other little note is that I have a new monitor here. It's bigger, it's a wider aspect ratio. Hopefully it's not going to affect the quality of my videos. I think it's going to make the icons look a little bit smaller. If this is a problem, you guys let me know and I will fix it for the next video. I will figure it out. But I think it's going to be fine. The parts that we'll be making today, if we start at the very top of the roof, we have a ridge board. And from there, we have two types of rafter. We have a common rafter, and the common rafter has, down where it meets the top plates, it has a cut made in it called the bird's mouth cut. And we also have a fascia rafter that doesn't have that cut. That's the only difference between the two of them in our case. Um, we have a fascia board, which we might get to today if we have time. And that is everything that we're doing. You've probably seen lots of different types of roofs in your life, and some of them have very complicated framing with a lot of different angles and a lot of planning to do. We are doing just a simple roof, and we'll have just a common rafter and we'll have a fascia rafter. The other parts that we've learned were the ridge board and the fascia board. Now the cuts on the rafter that I would like you to know for today are the ridge cut at the top, at the bottom there's the tail cut, and there's the bird's mouth cut. And if you weren't able to see the bird's mouth cut very well before, there's a picture of the bird's mouth cut right there. The stuff that I'm going to go through next, you don't have to worry about memorizing all this. Just try and kind of follow along, and it's more of giving you a broad overview of how it would be done in the real world, because we're going to do it in SketchUp and it's very different. There's several ways to plan out how you would build a rafter. So there's mathematical ways where you would actually make yourself a triangle, and you would take the half the width of the ridge board and you would subtract that from that triangle, and then you would add how much overhang you want down here, and that you would figure it out using math that way. There is a method using a framing square. So this is a big steel square like a carpenter might have, and on the edge of that square there's a bunch of tables and numbers that he can learn to use to create his rafters, and he would then take that square and use it to lay out that rafter. It's kind of an old school way. There's speed squares, which has a different set of rules and markings. You can also use that to lay out your rafter, and there's sets of instructions if you were going to do that in the real world. One other little bit of trivia here: you might not see rafters on a lot of construction sites because mostly modern house building uses trusses, and this is a truss. This would be made in a factory, and there's several of them in London, and it would be put on a truck and it would be drove out to the job site, and then they would lift them up onto the roof with a bunch of big strong people or with a crane, and they would nail them in place. So it actually ends up being faster and cheaper if you're building a lot of houses to do it this way. If you're building your own shed, you might do just as well to build your own rafters. So if I was doing this, and I've built a couple of sheds this way, I would probably kind of plan it out in SketchUp. Then I would get my pencils and my rulers and I would lay out a rafter and cut that one rafter, and I would kind of make sure that I'm looking at the shed and checking it as I go along. And then that rafter would be my template, and I would write on it, and it would say template right on it with a pencil. Then I would trace that rafter and cut out one more then I would lay them down on the ground and make sure that it all makes sense and that all the cuts, the angles sort of work and that it's going to fit on top of the shed. And then I could finally turn around and cut out all the rafters that I had to do. Now in what we're doing, we're not going to do any math. We're going to use the features of Sketchup to make life simple and avoid math. It means that we're going to have to do some trickery and some shenanigans in Sketchup, but if you follow along step by step, it's not going to be a big problem for you. So let's go build a rafter in Sketchup. So starting with to build the rafter here, we're just going to make it out of a model 2x4 that we make here. So we'll get our rectangle tool and we'll create a model of a 2x4 and we'll just make it really long, and then we'll do what we want with it to help us lay out our rafters. So we're going to get a rectangle started and then 3.5, 1.5, and you'll push pull that out to 10 feet, so 120 inches. And then we'll just cut what we want off of it later. And it didn't really grab and push pull there, so I have to try again. Here we come out 120. And we're going to take that, and like I said, we don't make this a component right away. We need to get it rotated into the position that it's going to be. And that is, it has to do with the way components work. It's, if we don't rotate it first, it just doesn't behave right. The rotate tool, if you just grab it and you put it on a surface, it's going to just rotate that surface, because we're sort of in the same position where this is why we make things into components, because they're easy to move around and easy to work with, and you don't end up distorting those edges like that. So this is not what you want. And the simple way to avoid that when you're working with something that's not a component and you just want to rotate is to get the select tool and then you click 3 times on it, and that selects all of the surfaces and all of the edges of that thing that we just made. So then you would get your rotate tool, and the rotate tool is you go over to the move tool actually, and when you open up the move tool, you'll see 3 choices. You want to select that circular choice with the arrows in it. Now, right now, the rotate tool appears as though it's blue. Okay, so it's going to rotate in the blue axis. If I hold it against this edge here, it's going to rotate in the red axis. If I hold it up against here on this edge, it's going to rotate in the green axis. And we're going to move this into position later, so it doesn't matter what point we rotate it around. So you can just make sure that your rotate tool is green, and then you can click on it, and you can pull it out and make sure that you're now on the red axis. The rotate tool, you have to click 3 times. You have to click the spot that you're going to rotate it around. You have to put a reference line where you're starting your rotation. So I've just clicked the second time, so that gives me my reference where I'm starting my rotation. And then you can start to rotate up. And the same way that we do dimensions, you can just enter the number of degrees that you want. We're going to rotate this 30 degrees, so you just do 30, enter. And that is our rafter ready to be made into a component. So you just, now you can right click it and you can make it a component. And we're going to move that onto its position. So you have the rotate tool selected right now, so you have to go back to the tool selection, hit that rotate, and you have to reselect the move tool. And you're going to try to find the exact midpoint of that rafter. So you have to move your mouse along this edge here, move your pointer along this edge until it says midpoint. Got it, right? Then move that over here to the very tip of the shed. And we're just going to let it sit right there for now. And there we go. So that's right. And I had a little trouble earlier. This is my second run through of this. I had a little trouble making sure that I had grabbed the correct edge. You need to make sure that this face is flush with the front of this shed, right? So that this corner here is flat with the actual very edge of that rafter. And it looks like I've got that now. So now we need to make a second rafter. And we're going to use the rotate tool again to spin this and make it into a second rafter. So I've had to do a retake here because I did rotate this and then my mouse came off the axis and it didn't work out. So when you rotate this, you're going to be looking down on the top of it so that you can be in the correct axis, because that helps you to position your axis. And you want your rotate tool to be blue, and I had it there and then it went away. So now my rotate tool is blue. We're going to move this into position, so it doesn't really matter where you rotate it from, right? As long as you're on that component and your tool is blue, you can click once, then drag out along the red axis, and then you click again on the red axis, and then you're going to rotate around. And when you get it rotated around, hit control so that you know you're making two of them so that you're duplicating it. When you get it rotated around, you have to make sure you're on the red axis. That was my mistake last time. So I'm on the red axis. I'm going to be very careful not to move this time, and I'm going to click it. Now I have two rafters and they're both facing the way that they need to face, and I just have to get this second rafter into position on the shed. So I'm going to you have to go over to the rotate tool. You have the rotate tool selected right now. You have to open that up and select the move tool and slide your mouse along until you find the midpoint of that component. Oh, I had it. I'm going to move it onto the exact same spot. And here is where the shenanigans come in, because right now we have these two rafters and they are existing in the same place. So, I mean, you wouldn't be able to do this in the real world, obviously. Two pieces of wood cannot overlap in the real world, and this would be completely unworkable, but it does work well with SketchUp. So now we just have to use this little bit of geometry at the top here. This little point right here, actually at this point, shows us where the exact middle of the shed is, as long as we've taken our time and rotated everything correctly. You'll notice if you don't get it rotated correctly that all these edges don't line up just perfectly. If you look at it right now, these two boards are actually perfectly aligned in the same place in the way they overlap each other. So if you can get looking straight down that, we're going to use this this point right here to set where we set our ridge board. And our ridge board will be a 2x6, and we'll just get a rectangle and we will draw out a green. It has to be outlined in green, and we want to go 1.5, 5.5, and we've got our rectangle made. We will pull that out for now just to match excuse me, where's my push-pull tool here? There we go. We'll pull it out to match the length of the shed, which is 12 feet. So we'll go 1, 2, and the single quotation mark to make a 12-foot ridge board. And that we can make a component out of right away. And we will make it a component. So here we come with the trickery and the shenanigans again. We are going to take this ridge board and we are going to grab it right by the midpoint of the top, and we're going to move that midpoint of the top of the ridge board right onto that X right there, where we can see that now we actually have such shenanigans that we have three pieces of wood occupying the same place at the same time. And now we're going to sort of use that ridge board to set up our ridge cut on our rafters. So now that we've got it positioned, the simplest thing to do is to hide this one rafter over here. So I'll get my select tool and select that, and then we will hide it. So our next steps are to make our tail cut and our ridge cut. We're going to have to edit this component, and we're going to use this geometry here to set ourselves up. When we edit the component, to save ourselves a step, we'll do both cuts at once. And if you get the tape measure tool and you come down to this edge right here on the shed and you pull yourself a construction line, get yourself on the red axis, and we're going to measure out 10 inches. So you just enter a 10, and if you've done everything right, then that construction line will be right on the edge of that rafter. So now we have a component editing to do. So we're going to open up the component to edit, and we just have to draw 2 lines with the pencil tool. So we get the line tool, which is a pencil, and you have to get exactly onto that intersection between the ridge board and the rafter and click on it, and you'll draw yourself a line down to the other intersection and click on it. And then quite often the line tool wants to just keep drawing lines. It doesn't seem to be doing it this time, but I always go over and I click the line tool again so that I'm starting a new line. And I have to get onto that intersection and that intersection, and that gives me my lines for my cuts. So now I go to push pull, I get that section right there, I pull it back, and there we go, that's that cut done. I get this section right here, pull it back, that's that section done, and I can close my component. And I can unhide my other one just to look and see how that I've got it right. Unhide all, and I do. If I want, I can move them just to see if they look good on the ends, and I can move it aside and it looks good. Just hit escape. This one, everything seems to be aligned correctly. Just hit escape. So that is our 2 rafters done. The other thing that you would have when you were doing this in the real world is the ridge board would not be sticking up above the rafters like this ridge board is. So you would move it down just to be level with the top of the rafters. And we'll just get our move tool, and we'll get that very corner of the ridge board, and we'll get it moving on the blue axis and hold down the shift key, and then we'll move it down till it's flush with that corner right there. And that's the 2 fascia rafters done and the ridge board. And this has turned into a 17-minute video, and it's probably the toughest thing to keep organized. There's a lot of little fussy things here. I'm going to just call it quits right here, guys, and we will continue on with the bird's mouth cuts next time out. Anyway, I hope, let me know if you're having any troubles, because all these rotations have to be done correctly or things don't end up aligning. All these rotations and movements, undo might be your friend occasionally. So you can use the escape button, use Control Z, use the undo button down at the bottom of the screen down here, and you should be able to work your way through this on your own, I'm hoping. Anyways, guys, good luck with it, and let me know if you're having troubles. I will do my best to help you out.